My title for today is Should Christians Eat Meat Offered to Idols? Paul and Jesus are not contradicting each other. Why? Because one of the comments I recently received on my video about the church at Thyatira contained some strong language that I will not be publishing online, and it claimed that I had misunderstood the Bible. I was forced to delete 2 comments because both were swearing at me and, frankly, incorrect. I'm publishing this video to help people understand the Bible correctly. Now, I don't believe these people were at fault. I've heard it come out of some poorly educated pastors' mouths before as well. I believe we can have a good Christian dialogue without the coarse language. This channel is not just for adults, but for students under the legal age, hence the reason I was forced to delete the comments. The viewer quoted 1 Corinthians chapter 8, where the Apostle Paul says that an idol is nothing at all in the world, 1 Corinthians 8:4, and concluded that Christians are free to eat meat offered to idols. He argued that Jesus could not, therefore, condemn Christians in Revelation chapter 2 for eating food sacrificed to idols. Now, this is an important question. I'm glad they brought this up because on the surface, Paul appears to say something different to Jesus. But when we read both passages in their historical context, we discover they are addressing 2 completely different situations. I'm Peter Matthews. If you watch to the end, I'll explain why I don't eat meat from butcher shops or supermarkets, and I'll explain the reason why. And it's not what you might be thinking. It has nothing to do with this topic at all. Let's begin with the Apostle Paul. The city of Corinth was filled with pagan temples. Much of the meat sold in the public markets had first been offered during the pagan sacrifices before being sold to the public. Christians could hardly avoid purchasing such meat. Paul's point in 1 Corinthians 8 is theological. Since there is only one true God, idols possess no real existence or power. Therefore, eating meat itself has no spiritual effect. As Paul writes, food does not bring us near to God. We are no worse off if we do not eat, and no better off if we do. That's 1 Corinthians 8, verse 8. However, Paul immediately introduces an important qualification. Christian liberty must always be governed by love. If eating that meat causes another believer, particularly one who has recently converted from paganism, to believe that idol worship is acceptable, then the stronger Christian has sinned against both the believer and Christ himself. Notice that Paul's concern is not primarily about the meat. His concern is about our conscience. As Gordon Fee observes in his highly respected commentary on 1 Corinthians, Paul's entire argument revolves around protecting weaker believers whose previous participation in pagan worship made the issue spiritually dangerous for them. Paul develops this argument even further in chapter 10. There he explicitly forbids Christians from participating in pagan sacrificial meals inside idol temples. He writes, "You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons too." 1 Corinthians 10:21. This statement is often overlooked by many pastors and Christians alike. Paul distinguishes between purchasing meat in the marketplace, which may have been previously sacrificed, and actively participating in pagan worship. The latter is absolutely forbidden. Now let's turn to Revelation chapter 2 that I discussed in my previous episode. If you haven't watched it, I encourage you to watch this first, and there'll be a little link up the top here that you can click on. Jesus addresses the church at Thyatira. He rebukes them for tolerating the false prophetess, symbolically called Jezebel. Now I say symbolically because the woman is not named Jezebel, but the demonic spirit possessing her is Jezebel. She is encouraging believers to practice sexual immorality and to eat food sacrificed to idols. Revelation 2:14. Notice the combination. The eating of idol food is inseparable from participation in sexual immorality. This immediately tells us that Jesus is not discussing ordinary marketplace meat or meat from the butcher. He is describing participation in pagan religious festivals. Archaeological and historical evidence demonstrates that Thyatira was famous for its numerous trade guilds. Membership in these guilds often require attendance to banquets held in honor of patron deities. These feasts regularly included sacrifices to pagan gods, ritual meals, heavy drinking, and frequent sexual immorality associated with pagan worship. Craig Coster explains that economic survival in Thyatira often depended upon belonging to these guilds, making the temptation to compromise exceptionally strong. Dr. Tony Keyes said to me many years ago, compromise tends to be the first step towards apostasy. It is that first step that you make that is critically important. You must turn away from it. Similarly, G.K. Beale concludes that the eating of idol food in Revelation refers to participation in pagan religious ceremonies rather than merely consuming previously sacrificed meat. In other words, Jesus condemns believers who knowingly participated in idolatrous worship itself. This is entirely consistent with Paul. In fact, Paul says exactly the same thing in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Both Jesus and Paul distinguish between eating ordinary food that happened to come from the marketplace and participating in pagan worship. One concerns the conscience, the other concerns idolatry. There is another important biblical connection. The language Jesus uses echoes the Jerusalem Council in Acts chapter 15. The apostles instructed Gentile believers to abstain from food sacrificed to idols alongside sexual immorality. Many scholars understand these prohibitions as referring to participation in pagan temple worship rather than merely purchasing meat from the butcher. Richard Borkham notes that Revelation consistently presents compromise with pagan worship as spiritual adultery against God. So, was Paul contradicting Jesus? No, not at all. Paul never encouraged Christians to participate in idol worship. He actually warned against these things in the strongest possible language. Likewise, Jesus was not condemning someone for unknowingly purchasing meat from the local supermarket. He was condemning believers who deliberately joined pagan religious celebrations, compromising their allegiance to Christ for social acceptance or economic advantage. The two passages complement each other perfectly. Paul teaches that Christian freedom must always be exercised in love and never at the expense of another believer's conscience. Jesus teaches that no amount of social pressure or financial advantage justifies participating in idol worship. Both insist upon wholehearted devotion to Christ. For Christians today, the principle remains timeless. The issue isn't simply food. The issue is loyalty. It's all about loyalty. Whenever Christians knowingly participate in practices that honor false gods or deny Christ or compromise the gospel for convenience, they repeat the very error that Jesus condemned at Thyatira. Christian liberty never includes permission to participate in idolatry. Finally, my comments in relation to my personal position were clarified, and I'll replay that for you now. As a beef producer myself, I eat the food from our farm that I know has not been sacrificed to idols or any other god. I've heard many pastors say that as Christians we can eat whatever we want. But frankly, Christ is very clear here. And I'm talking about Revelation chapter 2. Do not eat food sacrificed to idols. It's very, very clear. It doesn't matter what that idol is. Do not eat food sacrificed to idols. Do not get involved in sexual immorality. The spirit of Jezebel offers accommodation to a hostile world and calls it wisdom. Christ is very clear here. Do not eat food sacrificed to idols. It's very, very clear. Now, to go through that, I specifically linked eating food sacrificed to idols and the deception of Jezebel into sexual immorality. As I've stated here a number of times, for those who haven't watched other videos, I have a life-threatening allergy to sulfates that I use to preserve meat. I can die if I eat meat sprayed with sodium metabisulfate. I can only eat meat from our farm, our homegrown beef. This is not a life choice. God made me that way from birth. My young nephew shows signs, and my younger brother has been diagnosed later in life. I cannot drink alcohol or thousands of other store-bought products containing sulfate, or even medications that contain sulfate. That should not stop you from buying meat from your local supermarket or butcher. In fact, I actually encourage it because our beef cattle are often sold to Woolworths. So, we'll make money out of that. So thank you very much. But for me, I will not and cannot eat meat from the supermarket because of the risk of losing my life. As a decision of my will, this is a separate matter, as a decision of my will before the Lord, I will not eat meat sacrificed to idols. And nor should you. I hope my explanation explains my position. May the Lord bless you, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend.